But good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first OneOhio Recovery Foundation Impact Academy. My name is Sarah Anstein, and I'm the Director of Partnership and Outreach for the Foundation. It's a very exciting time for Ohio as we just launched our grant portal and opened registration. To support organizations as they gear up to apply for funds from the Foundation, we have launched the OneOhio Impact Academy. In partnership with experts from around the state, the OneOhio Impact Academy webinar series will provide free webinars to highlight examples of programs and services that align with the Foundation's summarized opioid abatement strategies. So if we can go to the next slide. So first up in our Impact Academy webinar, I am so excited to be joined today with Danielle Gray, the Executive Director of Ohio Recovery Housing, to talk about recovery housing. Please visit our website to register for the other Impact Academies. If you have friends or colleagues that were not able to join us today, this webinar will be recorded and shared on our website. If we could go to the next slide. As always, follow us on social media, sign up for our email updates. We want to make sure you're getting the latest and greatest from the OneOhio Recovery Foundation. And if you have any questions, you can email us at info@oneohiofoundation.com. And without any more from me, I will now turn it over to Danielle Gray.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. And we are just thrilled to be the first speaker for this webinar series and to talk to you a little bit about recovery housing. So just some objectives of what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some recovery housing basics, just so we can get the lay of the land and y'all be on the same page when it comes to, what we mean when we say recovery housing, and make sure we all understand what recovery housing is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the levels of support that are available within recovery housing. We recognize 3 levels of support for recovery housing residences in the state of Ohio. I'm also going to talk about the law and how recovery housing is regulated within Ohio, in particular, some recent changes to how recovery housing will be regulated, in particular, starting at the first of next year. And then finally talking about some opportunities to grow. So sharing some data and information about recovery housing need within our state and in particular in local communities. And then sharing that information with you and then giving you some suggestions on how recovery housing can be grown in our local communities so people have access to this critical recovery support. So before kicking it off, I did want to introduce myself and introduce Ohio Recovery Housing in case you're not familiar with us. So like Sarah said, my name is Danielle Gray. I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director for Ohio Recovery Housing. And we are an alliance of organizations and individuals operating quality recovery housing in Ohio. We are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to increase access to and quality of affordable recovery housing options for Ohioans with substance use disorders. So we are all about increasing access and then also increasing quality of recovery housing residences. And so what we do, I think we're most well known for our certification process. So we provide a certification for recovery homes within the state of Ohio that are interested in being recognized as meeting national standards for quality, as set by the National Alliance of Recovery Residences. So people who are interested in that can apply for certification. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about our certification process on some future slides. But that is certainly a big chunk of what we do, but it is not, everything that we do. We also develop a lot of recovery housing resources. So we provide training opportunities for recovery housing operators, for communities interested in learning more about recovery housing. We provide a lot of brief advice on how to operate quality recovery housing. So people call us all the time saying they want to open recovery homes, and, we give them brief advice and support and technical assistance. We also produce reports and guides. So we've got a ton of information on our website on particular topics, everything from, supporting people who use MAT in recovery housing to helping recovery homes with plans to address reoccurrence of substance use. She's supporting families and children in recovery housing, lots of resources. We produce those reports and guides and make them available for operators and communities. And then we coordinate a lot with the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services to produce information and best practice guides, including the Recovery Housing Development Guidebook. And then we also perform a lot of education and information on recovery housing. And so we work to ensure our stakeholders and decision makers know what recovery housing looks like. And then we advocate for recovery housing as a critical piece of the continuum of care for people in recovery. So we do a lot of work, especially at the local level, when there might be local communities, zoning boards, or similar organizations within local communities who might need some help understanding recovery housing, what it is, what it isn't, and then also advocating for recovery homes to be located in areas of opportunity within our great state. Many of you are probably familiar with many of the NIMBY issues that recovery homes face. So we do a lot of work really trying to educate and inform, our local communities and help operators who might be experiencing some of those NIMBY issues. So that's also something that we do. And just to level set and make sure we're all on the same page, I do want to be clear about what we mean when we say recovery housing. Recovery housing is defined in the Ohio Revised Code in Chapter 5119. And the definition is housing for individuals recovering from alcohol use disorder or drug addiction that provides an alcohol-free and drug-free living environment, peer support, assistance with obtaining alcohol and drug addiction services, and other alcoholism and drug addiction recovery assistance. So this is a very clear definition. We're lucky to have it. I know many of you might have heard, people throw out different terms for recovery housing. You might have heard people say sober living, or you might have heard them say three-quarter house, or any of those types of terms for recovery housing. So I just like to be clear, like, hey, when I speak about recovery housing, I'm talking about this that's defined within the Ohio Revised Code and this definition. And I know that definition can be a little bit, clunky. It's a legal definition. So I want to break it down for everyone so they can understand, like, hey, this is what we mean when we say recovery housing, as opposed to, another housing type or another service that's designed for people with substance use disorders. And so recovery housing is housing. It is a housing environment. It is not a clinical treatment environment. People, don't get clinically placed into recovery housing. It's a choice. It's a housing environment. And it is also not an adult care facility or a residential care facility. Ohio does have those facilities that primarily serve people who have severe or persistent mental illness. So it is very different from an adult care facility or residential care facility. It is not, considered one of those. It is also not a correction center. It's not, a prison. So people don't get sentenced to recovery housing. It's a choice for people to live within a recovery home. And recovery housing, being housing, it has a resident-driven length of stay. So residents can stay in the home for as long as they choose to. There's no arbitrary time limits placed on an individual staying within a recovery home. So recovery homes are not allowed to say, hey, you have to move out after 60 days, 90 days, a year, whatever it is. It's not an arbitrary thing that's placed on everyone. It really is up to the resident, and how they're feeling and what they want to do, how long that they stay. Similarly, it's not tied to their treatment program. So if somebody stops going to treatment or chooses a different treatment provider, they don't automatically lose their housing. It is their housing, primarily their housing. And the way I like to explain it to people is, if you're in a residential treatment setting, your primary purpose for being there is to engage in treatment services. And so you're offered, shelter, room, board, all of those things. So that way you can better engage in treatment. In recovery housing, it's flipped. So in recovery housing, you are provided a safe, supportive, illicit drug and alcohol-free living environment. And then you might be offered treatment services in order to help you maintain that housing. So in order to continue to live in the housing, you have to maintain your recovery and be committed to your recovery. And so you would be offered, treatment services and engage in those services in order to help you maintain your housing. But it's primarily about the housing, not primarily about the treatment services. And so with that, people have free choice in their treatment. So they're not forced to move out if they if they choose a different treatment provider, or if they stop going to treatment, or if their treatment program ends. That is not what requires them to move out. They move out when they're ready to move out. Recovery homes also operate as landlords. So that is really important. Every resident of a recovery home gets a resident agreement that acts as their lease. So they sign that agreement, and then they are considered a tenant, and the operator of the home is the landlord. And they have that landlord-tenant relationship, as opposed to a clinical relationship, or things of that nature. And then there's a home-like environment. And so we really focus in on this too, that, all the services, supports, and things that are offered within a recovery home are those that are home-like. And the home is really set up to be home-like. The furnishings, the layout, everything is set up to be home-like. And the big question here really is, do people normally do this in their own home? And so we get these questions a lot when it comes to, programs and services, and, people get really bogged down. Is it clinical, or is it not clinical, or is it peer supportive? And really the question is do people normally do this in their own home? So when you think about things like group therapy, generally people leave their home and they go somewhere else for group therapy, and then they might return to their home. So similarly, residents of a recovery home, they don't have group therapy within the recovery home. They leave the recovery home and they go someplace else for group therapy. But then things like peer support, peer supporters definitely see people within their own private homes and within the community and in lots of different places. So yes, a person's peer supporter can meet them at the recovery home because that's their own private home. Similarly, telehealth. Everyone accesses telehealth from their own private homes. So yes, people who live within a recovery housing residence, they can access telehealth services, within their own home, which is the recovery home. And then in addition to other programs and services and things, it really is about, again, do people normally do this in their own home? For example, a long time ago, we had a recovery housing residence that wanted to bring in someone who provide haircuts for all the residents within the home. And they would come in, once a month and provide people haircuts. And that's something, again, that we leave our homes and we go out into the community and we get a haircut in the community. We don't have people just come into the home to provide us a haircut, again, unless we're a person with some sort of physical disability or something of that nature where that service is needed. And then of course, that would be okay. But just as a regular course, people typically leave their home and get a haircut in the community. So that is what we encourage them to do, because then again, it starts feeling more like, an institutional environment if it's, you're providing these services or things within the home that really aren't typically done within a person's own individual home. It starts to feel more institutional rather than a home-like environment. So instead, we encourage them to say, hey, maybe we can have, you visit that person who's offering haircuts, in their salon for that, instead of having them come into the home and setting up a space within the home for people to get haircuts. Because again, that's typically not something that people do within their own home. And so another part of recovery housing is that it is recovery housing. And so this is also, extremely important to remember. And what we mean by recovery housing is that there's an illicit drug and alcohol-free living environment. Residents are supporting one another in their recovery in a planful and purposeful way. And there's connection to services and supports in the community. And so for illicit drug and alcohol-free living environment, that applies to the entire property. So everyone living in the home is a person with a substance use disorder, and they're all people who are actively living in recovery. And of course, when we say illicit drug and alcohol-free, we mean, no alcohol, no recreational marijuana. But, people definitely, if you're on a prescription drug and that is legally prescribed to you by your doctor, MAT, other medications, then yes, those, are definitely allowable within recovery housing residences, and there should be medication policies in place to help ensure the safety of the environment. But we are talking about, illicit drugs, recreational cannabis, and alcohol. So those are not allowed in the recovery home. And it's the entire environment is that way. People choose to live in a recovery home because they want to live with other people who are also in recovery. They don't want to live in a place where their neighbor, their roommate, someone else is going to go out and, drink and then come home. Even if they're not bringing it onto the property, they don't want to live with other people who might, be going out and then coming home and sharing stories about, going out and having drinks or doing whatever. They really want to be living with other people who are living in recovery. And it applies to the entire property. So you don't have to worry about like any shared spaces like hallways or the laundry room or anything like that. The entire home is a safe environment for you, is supportive for you and your choice to live in recovery. And you can rest assured that everyone that you're living with is dedicated to living in recovery and is going to support you in that. And then also residents are supporting one another in their recovery in a planful way. And so this is why everyone in the home is a person with a substance use disorder, because it's not about, again, a person getting services from, like a clinician or something like that, or a leader, just providing services one way. It really is about providing an environment where the residents are supporting each other in their recovery. And as a person grows in recovery, they're not only, getting help from one another, but they're giving help to others, and they're really being developed into leaders within their recovery. And you can't do that if there's only one person with a substance use disorder living with a whole bunch of other people who may agree not to use drugs or alcohol while they're in the house, but they don't have that lived experience and they don't have that way to really support that person as a peer. And there's also no one for that person to support if there's no one else living in the home who isn't also experiencing, being in recovery from a substance use disorder. So those are really critical aspects. We certify the entire home, and it really isn't just about the people who live there. Like, hey, do you happen to have a person with a substance use disorder who lives there? But it's about that environment that's created, where you really are creating this environment, both within the physical environment and programmatically, where residents are really supporting one another and becoming leaders within their own recovery journey. All residents also have a recovery plan. So this is a written recovery plan where residents identify their own recovery goals. And these vary, again, depending on, where they're at in their recovery and what they want to do. But then the home helps them achieve those goals and checks in with them on those plans and those goals. And our houses at our higher levels of support, document those plans and make sure that people are making progress, on those plans. So it really is something that they're engaging in a very thoughtful, planful, and documented way to make sure that people are setting those goals and they're achieving those goals and they've got the resources and things that they need to move towards those goals. And then naturally with that is connection to services in the community. So like I said, they might need treatment services. And so they're going to be connected to treatment services within the community. But they may also need other resources, whether that's employment supports, childcare support, help with court programs or other things that they may be experiencing. So the recovery home really helps connect them to whatever services they might need within their individual community. Really just to help that person advance in their recovery plan and make sure that they've got all of those resources within the community. And then with that too, it's really about, developing relationships with the recovery community outside the house. So that way, when the person moves out and when they choose to do that, they've already got all their recovery capital so they can continue to attend meetings or visit their sponsor, or they've got a church that they go to that's recovery oriented, or they've got other, recovery supports that will stay with them, after they leave the house. So all of their recovery supports aren't just taking place at the house, but they're getting integrated into the recovery community as well. So that way, when they move out, they've got that very, deep base of support that they can rely on as they continue on their recovery journey, beyond recovery housing. And so I know I mentioned levels of support, in the last slide, and I do want to dive into it a little bit here. You'll notice that these are the 4 levels of support that are defined by the National Alliance of Recovery Residences, and ORH is an affiliate of the National Alliance of Recovery Residences. And you'll see in here, I put level 4 recovery housing marked off in red. The reason why that is because in Ohio, level 4 recovery housing is considered residential treatment, and that must be appropriately licensed by the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. So we love our level 4 residential treatment providers, service providers. They're great. We can put them on our housing locator as a level 4, option for people who might be searching for that using our housing locator. They can come to our trainings, read our best practice guidance. Happy to talk to them as much as they want about recovery and the social model and everything of that nature, but we just can't certify them. We don't. So all of those other services that we offer, happy to offer those to residential treatment providers, but we don't certify them. They got to be licensed by the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. So it's a completely different process for them to become licensed to operate within the state of Ohio. And then we have our other 3 levels, level 1, level 2, and level 3. And level 1s are considered peer run, level 2 monitored, and level 3 are supervised. And so I'm going to dive into this a little bit more in a future slide, but I did, want to address like this question that we get all the time, which is, what levels are most important? And really a full continuum of recovery support is what's needed. We need all 3, well, all 4. We need residential treatment too, but we certainly need all 3 levels of recovery housing to help meet the needs of people throughout their recovery journey, wherever they may be in their recovery journey. And so all levels of recovery housing are really important. They're all needed, and there's not one that's like, hey, this one's better than the others. It really is about the target population that you're serving and their needs. And so really we want to focus in on what the target population is. And so when we talk a lot about the levels, I often get, questions about like, well, how do you tell the difference between, all these different levels? And people talk about staffing and they talk about, policies and procedures. But I think the easiest way to think about it and the best way to think about it is to not focus on the home, but to focus on the residents. Like, who are people serving? Because really that's what it's all about. It's about meeting the needs of the people that are being served and the people that are looking for that level of support. And so our higher levels of support, so our level 3s, are designed for people who are earlier in their recovery. So these are people who might be very early in their recovery. They might be, right out of, a hospital setting. They might still be engaged in, a partial hospitalization program or an intensive outpatient treatment program, and they need a safe and supportive place to live in order to help them on their recovery journey. They don't want to live in a place that promotes, active substance use. They want to live in a place that promotes recovery. And so they will be connected to our level 3 recovery homes that offer, a supervised environment. So there's a lot more supports within our level 3s. So there's that supervision. There's paid staff available whenever residents are present. There's more, really a lot of work developing that initial recovery plan, and really a focus on life skills development. And really, again, that focus in on life skills and really helping people develop those really basic, life skill things that they need. So really figuring out like, hey, where are you at, and getting, an ID, getting signed up for programs that you might need, like Medicaid. Like, do you have any, court appointments or things that you need to do? Like what, really like taking stock of what's going on and then formulating that plan to help that person who is very early in their recovery. And so you're checking in on that recovery plan probably a lot more frequently because of a person's needs in those, in that first initial time period when they're just entering recovery. And then there's, again, just more, more supports. So there's, and there's staff available at the home for supervision. So there's going to be more security on things like medications. And there might be more stringent visitor policies and things of that nature. Again, because you're trying to serve people who are very early in their recovery and who need all those additional supports, because that's the place where they are in their recovery, when they're entering into the home. And then our lower levels are really designed for people with more time in recovery. So our level 2 environments, typically we look for 28 days in recovery for a person to enter a level 2, because that environment's monitored. So there's not staff supervision 24/7 in a level 2. It is monitored. So there's someone definitely who's going to check in on residents, make sure, know where they are during the day, kind of know what they're up to. They're still going to check in with them on their recovery plan at minimum once a week. They're still going to monitor the house to make sure there's no illicit substances, alcohol, or recreational cannabis within the home. So they're still going to do that, but they're not going to be supervising the home on a 24/7 basis. So people need to be at that place in their recovery where they're ready for that and where they can be successful for that. Now, we do allow some level 2 homes to welcome residents who have at least 7 days in recovery, if they're able to provide that individual resident with supervision for that first time period when they first move into that home. So if that home is able to have the extra staffing and extra supports needed to ensure that that individual is supervised for their first 4 weeks while living in the home, then they can welcome people who have at least 7 days in recovery. But if they're not able to do that, then they have to welcome people who are 28 days or greater within recovery. And then our level 1s are really about peer-driven environments. People have to have a minimum of 6 months in recovery, and they're really at a point in their recovery where they can not only monitor their own recovery, but monitor and help support the recovery of others. And it really is about leadership development, helping residents establish like long-term, what their recovery journey is going to look like. We don't have documented recovery plans in level 1s because it really is the residents doing it for themselves, but they're still checking in with each other at house meetings and things like that on their recovery journeys and doing all of that. And then the operator still ensures that the property is free from substances and that there's screening and things like that taking place and is available if residents need additional support or if something happens. But really, we want to see people who are ready for that type of environment. And so that's the target population, for our level 1 homes. And it really is about developing people into leaders and really getting them, connected into the community. And so there are some laws that apply to recovery housing that have been on the books as long as I've known. So there's landlord-tenant law and state and federal fair housing law. All recovery homes are landlords. And I do like to share this because sometimes people in the wider community who are trying to make referrals to recovery homes, they might get frustrated because they have someone who needs housing, immediately. And they want to be able to call the recovery home and be like, hey, I want to send you this person so they can sleep there tonight because maybe they need a place to sleep tonight. And here on the other end of the phone, the recovery housing operator is like, well, we have an application process. We need to interview them. We need to do all of these things before we can welcome them into the home. And that can be frustrating for somebody who really needs really needs housing immediately. But one of the main reasons why people do that is because recovery housing, they are landlords and they're required to follow Ohio landlord-tenant law. And so if they do welcome someone into the home who doesn't fully understand their program, doesn't understand the requirements around maintaining recovery, maintaining an illicit drug, an alcohol-free living environment, and then they start acting in a way that puts the recovery of others at risk or is harmful to the others in the home, they have to go through the legal eviction process in order to evict that person from the home. And that can take a very long time, depending, on the individual circumstances and, courts in the local area and, local regulations. So that's the reason why a lot of recovery homes do have, an application process where they really are trying to be careful about making sure people understand and agree to the living environment that exists within recovery housing, and make sure that that's a choice that they're willingly making, and that they understand too that when they live in a recovery home, it's not just about them. It's about understanding that their behavior is going to impact everyone they live with. It's a shared living environment, so they're going to be sharing common spaces. They're going to maybe be sharing a bedroom and all of those things, and so their behavior really does impact others, and they want to make sure that they understand that when they're entering into a recovery housing environment. And then also all building health and safety codes. We really try to help operators understand that these do apply to recovery homes, and sometimes they might be unfair. And we certainly see many local communities try to restrict recovery housing by using their building code, fire safety regulations, and those things. We do have information for recovery homes on what they can do to get reasonable accommodations from those policies, but it is a very good idea for recovery homes to become aware of local building codes, health and safety codes, and zoning regulations within their local community. Each local community is different. So they really need to really look at what is required in their local community, because what's acceptable in Washington Courthouse, Ohio, may not be acceptable in Findlay, Ohio, or in Youngstown, Ohio, or in Marietta, Ohio. Each local community really is different. And then also employment and tax laws, particularly for organizations that are nonprofits, Ohio charitable law. This in particular for recovery homes, as they grow, they may want to hire staff or have resident leaders or house managers performing work. They really should become familiar with these laws and get an expert. So that way they know that they're following the law with regards to, wage and hour, workman's comp, and all those other employment and tax policies. And there are some new regulations related to recovery housing as well. So in addition to those that have always been in place, starting October 3rd, 2024, all recovery homes must register. And this the registry form is available through the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. So regardless of if homes are certified or not, they need to register. And anyone who is open, as of October 3rd, needed to register October 3rd. They needed to do that right away. And then new homes have 30 days from when the first resident moves into the home to register. So all recovery homes should be completing that form to register. If they haven't already, they should do that right away. And if they open a new home, they should do that within 30 days. And starting January 1st, 2025, there will be a public facing version of this registry, so people can go on and see who is registered and who is not. That is not available yet, but the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services does have that information and is sharing that with local county boards. So you can always reach out to the department or to the local county boards if you're curious about if someone has completed that registration form. And starting January 1st, 2025, all recovery homes must be certified in order to remain on this registry. And then only homes on the registry can receive funding from the state. So any public dollars that are available can only go to homes on the registry. They need to be on the registry to receive referrals from community behavioral health providers. So any licensed treatment providers, they need to ensure that homes are on this registry before they make a referral to the home, or to hold the property out to be a recovery home, sober living, or any other housing that is drug and alcohol free for people with substance use disorders. So people can't just switch, what they're calling the home. If it is a housing environment that is intended to be drug and alcohol free for people with substance use disorders, then it needs to be on the registry in order for them to continue to operate and receive those referrals. And the certifications, I can't speak for the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. They have, a choice in who they choose to accept certifications from. Everything that we've heard has said that they will accept certification from Ohio Recovery Housing, the NAR affiliate within the state of Ohio, and Oxford House. Oxford House offers a charter for organizations, and those are the two entities that they will be accepting certifications from. And also within the law is if there are organizations that are licensed as a halfway house by the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, then those individuals are allowed to call themselves recovery housing. They don't need to be on the registry, but they can if they want. But the law is pretty clear that if you're licensed as a halfway house, you can just keep that license. You don't need any other additional certifications or anything of that nature. Because a lot of those do provide, recovery support services and things like that. So those are some of the, upcoming changes. And so we're working really hard within our communities to make sure recovery housing operators are prepared for those changes and they can, become certified and meet those standards and be on the registry and receive those referrals, receive any funding that's available. And so just a little bit about our quality standards. I don't have time today to dive into every single standard, but that information is available on our website if you are interested in it. We do look at 4 main domains, when we go out and we review properties. First is administrative and operational. It matters how people run their business. So we want to see well-written policies and procedures. We want to see that they've got resident agreements, medication policies, a whole list of policies and procedures. Then we also want to see that's recovery oriented and that, people in recovery have a voice in the process of governing the organization. We also look at recovery supports. Like we said, it's critical. Like recovery housing is not just a place for people to sleep, while they might be going to treatment or getting services elsewhere and they happen to be people with substance use disorders. That's not what recovery housing is. It's about creating that recovery environment where people are connecting with one another and getting that peer support. So we look for that planful, thoughtful way that people encourage recovery support and make sure that all of those recovery supports are available within the home. And then we do look at the property. So we do look at the dwelling and we make sure that it is set up for resident interaction. So again, like there's, it's set up in a way that people aren't isolating in their bedrooms, but they're coming out of their bedrooms. They're interacting with one another. There's a space available for them to hang out with one another, for them to eat together. All of those things are there. And then we look for health and safety. So basic health and safety concerns, basic privacy things. We're not going to come in and tell somebody if their water heater is functional or not. That's not our role. But if we see something that's an obvious health or safety concern, we will require that to be corrected. And then also a good neighbor. We know recovery homes exist within communities. So whether that's a rural community, urban community, what have you, they exist within communities. And so we really want recovery homes to be good neighbors. So we look to make sure that they've got policies and procedures to be responsive to neighbor concerns if those come up, and that they have courtesy rules that prevent common issues amongst neighbors. Things like indoor furniture being outside and things of that nature. We want to see that they're practicing basic courtesy rules. And so we do have an application process, starts with an online application. We review all of those policies and procedures that I mentioned. We conduct an on-site visit that contains an interview. We really want to make sure that the policies and procedures aren't just things written on paper, but that the things implemented in practice. So we really want to make sure of that. And so we do that through a program interview. And then we review the physical property and we give people an opportunity to correct anything that needs to be addressed. So if we find something that needs to be addressed, they always get a chance to correct that. And then we'll provide whatever support that we can to help them correct that issue. And then approvals for 2 years. So our full certification is good for 2 years, and they must reapply and go through another program interview and things like that every 2 years in order to maintain their certification. I know many of you are interested in what the need for recovery housing is in Ohio, and we developed a tool with Dr. Brandon Green using CAST to help us answer that question. And so what Dr. Green did for us is he, created these estimates that allowed us to see, hey, what's the demand for recovery housing based on the relevant population, program usage rate, how often people use that service, and then, what's the estimated total number of individuals who would be in need of that service or want that service. And then we compared that to what exists in Ohio today. And I'll be honest with you, when we ran these estimates, there was no registry, there was no certification requirement. So we were doing our best to identify recovery homes, and there might be some missing. So that's just a reality of us working with the data that we had available, at the time. This is going to get much more accurate as we have a registry where we know we're going to have all of the data on existing recovery homes. So we did our best looking at people who are certified, received support from us. We did web searches, sent out surveys, and we tried to capture as many recovery homes as we could. And then from there, we ran the numbers, and we found, if you can see on this slide, all the way to the right, where it says all levels in blue for both all populations for both men and women, that we're only meeting 31% of the need statewide for recovery housing. So we're not even meeting a third of the need for recovery housing statewide. And that and I knew it was going to be low, but I didn't know it was going to be that low. So we really have got a long way to go when it comes to really meeting the needs of recovery homes. And then we see too, when we look at the levels, that we've got a lot of, we're still not meeting the full need for recovery housing for level 3. But we're also, we're below half in level 2s. Again, for all population, only meeting 32% of the need. And then for our level 1s, for 13% of the need for women, 8% of the need for men, and 8% overall so less than 10% of the need for level 1 recovery housing. So we really have a lot of work to do in building out that full continuum of recovery housing, so people have access to the service at whatever point in their recovery journey they need that recovery support. And then we also broke this down, by county board area. So we took a look at our map, and places in blue here are places where, hey, they don't have any identified recovery housing residents, at the time when we did this analysis towards the tail end of 2022. So that may have changed, by then, or again, we may have been missing a program. But as far as we were aware, there was no recovery homes within these counties. So we've still got a little bit of ways to go. You can see, especially in some of our more rural areas, of making sure that everyone has access to recovery supports. And then within our report, we did break down that too by county board region of what the need is by level of support. So you can see in certain counties, like if they're over 100%, that's blue. Kind of between 50 and 100 is green, then yellow, and then red if they're very low. So we see, again, a lot of red in level 1. There's not a lot of level 1, and then seeing more across the continuum as we look at that. And so just highlighting too, just our need for level 1 recovery housing is especially prevalent. And we hear this a lot from our operators too, where they have people in their level 3 or in their level 2 home, and it's a resident driven length of stay. And maybe they've been there for, 8 months, a year, but they're just, either they can't afford to move out, or for whatever reason, they want to continue living in an environment where they know it's safe, it's supportive, it's free from illicit substances, and it's a resident driven length of stay. So they can stay in that home as long as they're, following the policies, as long as they're continuing with their recovery plan, as long as they're doing what they need to do. The operator can't make them move out. So there definitely is a need for more level 1 homes, so we have more space, so people can move into those level 1 homes when they reach that level, and then open up those spots for others in a level 3 or level 2 environment. We also ran some numbers on economic benefit of recovery housing using research from researchers, Losasso and other researchers. That was published, again, a long time ago, but it's the best data we have. It was published in 2012. And so we looked at the overall cost savings and the cost benefits of recovery housing. And we estimated that just in 2022, so in 2022 alone, our network of recovery homes saved the state, nearly $35 million. And that was from reduced interaction with the criminal justice system, reduced healthcare expenses, reduced involvement in court systems, as well as child welfare programs, because people in recovery housing have much fewer interaction with those things. And they also calculated economic benefit. So really looking at not only cost savings, but also the benefits. So where we have people in recovery housing, they get jobs and they go to work and they pay taxes, and then they spend that money in the local community. They buy groceries, they pay their bills, they buy a car, they do all sorts of things that they wouldn't be doing if they weren't living in recovery housing and they were instead incarcerated or hospitalized or something like that. So we looked at seeing about $51 million in total economic benefit from recovery housing in 2022 alone. And we also calculated what would happen if we increased enrollment. So if we increased enrollment, by 10%, we'd see, another $3.5 million in cost benefits and another $8.5 million in cost savings. And a 25% increase in enrollment would be, about $8.7 million in cost benefits and about $21.5 million in cost savings. So recovery housing really is a great return on investment. And I would say particularly for our local communities, because when people have access to recovery housing, they're not calling, the ambulance, they're not putting strain on local police forces or local departments of job and family services or children's services. Instead they're working, they're getting jobs, and they're, contributing to the local community. And so how can OneOhio help? How can, our local regions, OneOhio, how can you guys help? So first off is help us establish homes in areas of need. So help those organizations that are trying to grow recovery housing in those areas of need that we can see from that CAST analysis. Then also support existing recovery homes. Recovery homes are difficult to operate, they're difficult to fund. And so just because a home is available today doesn't mean that home is going to be able to access all the resources that they need to continue to operate in the future. So really helping the existing homes, maintain their environments, maintain, their resources, so that way those programs can be sustained is just as important as establishing, and expanding resources and expanding new homes. And then, of course, providing help for resident development as well. And so just to explain a little bit about why this is so needed, I do want to let you know how recovery homes are currently funded. Funding is extremely limited. And I know many people might believe that recovery housing is reimbursable under Medicaid or health insurance, but that is not true. Medicaid does not pay for housing. Medicaid pays for clinical treatment services, and it reimburses for that, but it does not pay for housing. So if people think that someone can live in a recovery home and that recovery home can get reimbursed for, Medicaid for the recovery home, that is not how it works. They do not pay for housing. And so most public dollars flow through the local ADMH board. And so some ADMH boards have a levy, they have more resources, and they're able to make larger investments within recovery homes. Other local ADMH boards don't have those resources, and so there's not as much funding available, for recovery housing. And so we certainly tell people to get connected with their ADMH board, with their local drug addiction mental health services board. And then every once in a while as well, the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services may release RFPs. But that's not a set annual thing. So it's not like, hey, every year this RFP is released and you can get funding every single year. It really is year to year, what funding is available, how much does your county or the state choose to invest in recovery housing, and then you have to compete with other programs for that funding. So recovery homes really, find themselves often, struggling to get those resources because they're competing with lots of other, worthy programs, with treatment programs, with, prevention programs, with all these other things for this very, very limited amount of money. And the only general revenue funds that are set aside for recovery housing within our state budget, we do have some set aside. It's $3 million for the entire state per year. So that does not stretch very far when you think about, how expensive it is to run housing, to have only $3 million for the entire state, per year. And then also we tell recovery housing operators to be cautious because there's a lot of bad actors out there who might tell recovery home operators like, hey, if you house people who go to our treatment and make sure they go to our treatment, we can give you money to support your operation. Well, that's a kickback and that's illegal. And so we tell people to be really cautious about these funding schemes that are out there, because we know they're happening. We know they're out there. We know that this is a way that people are looking at to fund recovery housing, and we don't want people to structure their programs this way because it's unethical, and then it's probably also illegal. So we really know that there needs to be more resources out there so people can operate these programs and fund them sufficiently. And we can avoid having bad actors enter the space with different schemes that might be unethical or illegal. And so we certainly need funds to establish, more new homes, especially level 1 and level 2 housing. You can see in our estimates that we are very low there. We also need more housing, particularly in rural areas where we know things like transportation and other resources are challenging. And then we need more housing that can support families and children. In particular, we do have homes that provide services where families can live with their kids within recovery housing, but typically the buildings that are best suited for this are more of an apartment style building, and those can be very expensive buildings to construct and build. And so we definitely need more of those types of spaces, so that way we can have families together, living together, and support parents who are in recovery, as well as support the entire family. And then when it comes to supporting existing homes, help residents access the housing that is there. So offering rent and utility subsidies would be extremely helpful if somebody can't afford to pay rent. 87% of the recovery homes in our network, charge at least some rent to residents to help them, maintain the operations of the recovery home. And so having access to a rent and utility subsidy could really help people access that recovery home, when it's available and when they need it. And really, help that recovery home serve the entire population that's in their community and remain sustainable. And also support some workforce development programs. It is just as there's a larger behavioral health workforce crisis, recovery housing is not immune to that crisis. So we do need more workforce models that can help us bring people into the field of recovery housing so we can have a strong, reliable workforce to help within this field. So peer-to-career models where we help people who may be residents of recovery housing who want to have a career in this space and have a job and make their livelihood from working in recovery housing. Something like an alumni workforce program where alumni of recovery residences are connected to employment opportunities within behavioral health, including recovery housing. Then training and education to attract individuals to want to work in this field, and then incentives to keep good people in the field. We definitely lose people very quickly because it's not a very highly paid field, and people they need to be compensated in order to take care of their families and themselves. And so just any strategies that we could use to give incentives to people who are doing a good job in the field to help them stay in the field can be really helpful. And then also another way to support existing homes is critical repairs funds for properties. Just like any of us, when we're living in our homes, or if you're renting and you have a landlord, your landlord probably struggles with issues related to the physical property. Something like a furnace breaking down or something like that, or the roof needing a repair can really be a huge expense for a recovery housing operator. And that can mean the difference between them, staying open and being a quality recovery home and offering that quality space, or them having to close their doors because they just can't keep up with the physical property. So having, funds available to help them maintain the physical property in a way that's quality, in a way that supports recovery, can be very helpful to support our existing homes. And supporting residents and resident development, job training programs for residents in recovery housing, helping recovery homes start social enterprises where residents learn a skill and are able to enter into the workforce. Those are all great ways to support recovery housing residents. And then as well as family connections, like additional services and supports to help residents, have a good relationship with their families, maintain their relationship with their families, in particular, any children, and then childcare services for residents who have their children living with them. We see that that's a major barrier to residents, accessing all sorts of services, accessing jobs, just making sure that they've got, good high quality childcare can be a big barrier. So offering those childcare services for recovery homes that serve families and their kids. And so ORH can help operators by offering short-term technical assistance and support. People can call us all the time. We've got a whole list of trainings and things on our website. We're definitely here to help people and to help explain what recovery housing is. Like I said, if they have an issue with their local government, we're here to offer that short-term technical assistance and support. If they need help developing policy, we can offer that as well, and all the resources and tools available on our website. And so with that, I hope that's a good overview. I did want to see if there are any questions. I can't see a chat box, but I'm assuming Sarah can help me out if there are questions in the chat box that I can answer.
Yes, and we did have some great questions come in. Danielle, can you make a plug for your website?
So our website is ohiorecoveryhousing.org. So people can go on there and they can see, there's links to trainings, there's links to all the resource documents we have. It's all available there. Like I said, for some reason, I can't see the chat box, so I can't type it in, but I'm sure Sarah can get you that info.
Yes. Another question was, what was the name of the agency that recovery homes need to register with?
They need to register with the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services.
Perfect. Another question. Would folks, around the idea of would folks normally do this in their home? How about regularly scheduled 12-step or other recovery group meetings?
And that, again, typically people leave their home and they go to those 12-step meetings. Typically, we don't have those meetings in a private home where we're inviting, all sorts of people into our home for that meeting. People typically leave their home. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that 12-step work or things like that can't take place in the home amongst the residents themselves. They can certainly do that. But, we want to caution against having those big public meetings where you're just kind of welcoming anyone into the home, particularly around the drug and alcohol-free living environment. Making sure that you're maintaining that as well.
And I will answer our last question. There were some other really great questions that came in kind of specific to different levels of the recovery homes. I would encourage you to reach out directly to Danielle at Ohio Recovery Housing for those more specific ones. And maybe we need to be doing more of these webinars. One question, and Danielle, I think you do have some more of these types of webinars that you do, but one question came in about, can OneOhio funds be available for homes that are already certified? Absolutely. So each region has its own kind of allocation amount. So there is no, base amount that you can apply for. I would just take a look at how much the region that your recovery home is in, how much that region has, and that's how much that region has to award. So we are now at 11 o'clock. I know some folks asked about slides and if they will be made available. I'll post them if they are, but certainly this recording will be made available and posted on our website. Thank you all so much. This was incredible. Thank you, Danielle. This was so helpful. I know I always learn so much whenever I hear you talk about recovery housing, and I'm just so thrilled that so many regions have been talking about recovery housing and have prioritized recovery supports as a funding priority this round. So certainly a lot of interest. And here at the foundation and at Ohio Recovery Housing, we want to be a resource to all of you so that we have high quality recovery housing that's accessible to everyone throughout the state. So thank you all so much for coming, and hope to see you at our next one.
Yeah, and I'll just put in a plug. If you do have those specific questions, please feel free to reach out to me on our website. But then, like Sarah said, once a month we offer a general recovery housing kind of intro training where we kind of dive in a little bit deeper into the stuff we talked about today. If you've got those detailed questions, happy to have you on that webinar, recommend it. So, but yeah, we appreciate being here. Thanks for letting us be your first ones. I look forward to learning more and attending the others. So thank you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.